Shabbat Shalom. There was a moment at the start of the pandemic when Sesame Street decided to have a show to address what was happening. The seriousness of it and the confusion of it, and to teach children and their families about everything that was happening. Needing to wear, I don't think it was a mask, but it was wearing gloves at the time and worrying about touching everything, the schools closing and why it was happening and the dangers and how to stay safe and what a pandemic was. But also, and there were hosts from Sesame Street around the world, they were also trying to give a message of hope and say, don't be too worried, we're going to get through this, we can do this. And the wisdom of children and of some of children's shows, trying to hold on to hope despite all the complexities. And we are living in an age of complexity, an age where so many of the truths that we took for granted no longer seem to apply in our world, and the global events that are happening, the economic events, the politics. And it's not always bad, but it makes your head spin. It's hard to find our sense of the way we're used to being and of living amidst so many changes, what to do. And in our parsha we find, in a peculiar way, a most profoundly horrifying example of this type of reality. In the binding of Isaac, the Akedat Yitzchak. So Abraham is commanded by God to do the unthinkable, and he heads to Mount Moriah to sacrifice his son Isaac. And it really is this earth-shattering, profoundly shocking and unsettlingly strange moment also for Abraham, because this is the God who he's been talking to for so long, who's been promising him and telling him so much, giving him the covenants. And now he's the one who's telling him to sacrifice his son. And for 3 days Abraham has to carry this in his heart. Not only the horror of what he's being asked to do, but also the shattering of what he'd come to understand his calling in life was about, his inner geography of everything and what made sense and what didn't make sense, and where he'd placed his being in the place of God and all of it, and all the experiences he'd had and what God had said, everything shattered and confused. And the Ishbitzer Rebbe has an interesting way of framing it. He says Abraham had to carry two conflicting truths with him in that moment, two conflicting truths. And one of them was, God had said, "Beyitzchak yikareh lecha zara," that through Isaac will be your descendants. Through Isaac, all of your descendants will come, which is what God had promised him after sending Ishmael away. And then also, "Kach et bincha," take your son, Isaac, and offer him up as an offering, burnt offering. Your beloved son. So how do you carry both of those conflicting truths in your being at the same time? The same God had said both. So the Ishbitzer Rebbe says, there was nothing Abraham could do but just put one step in front of the other and hold both of them, and believing that at some point it would make sense and he'd find a way out of it. And in those 3 days of holding those conflicting truths, Judaism was made, our religion was made, all the way until Mount Moriah. And one can say how much of our journey over 4 millennia as a Jewish people has been about holding conflicting truths in our heart and in our soul. We're told that we're chosen, but at the same time we seem to be abandoned by God and history. We're supposed to be the agents of peace, bringing peace to the wolf lying down with the lamb, but all we seem to experience is destruction. And how strange that vision of Isaiah must have been to those who endured so much. And we are the people with a spiritual home, yet we're so often homeless. God left us, and yet we continue to refuse to leave our God. And this has been our path, holding opposite truths in our hearts and minds and doing what we can to make sense of it and come up with answers. And finding faith that somehow the universe would steer it all to goodness and that we were doing our part at least as we walked ahead. If we go back to Abraham, how to have faith in God's promise amidst all that was happening. Unthinkable what God was telling him to do, and how excruciating but also powerful for Abraham, having to go as deep as he possibly could. Who is this God, and what is my life about, and what has all of it been about, and what is this moment? And in the end, when he arrived at Mount Moriah, there is truly the birthplace of the Jewish path, the altar. And the belief that the brokenness of the world and all those conflicting truths do eventually lead to a new unity and to a new wisdom and to transformation. On those big levels, but really in all of our lives that we each hold. So many of us hold conflicting truths that we're trying to balance in our lives that don't seem to make sense in our own life. How do they even come together? About our vision for life, our relationships, our inner commands. And yet we're commanded to hold those conflicting truths with faith and vision. And as some midrashim portray, Abraham himself actually put the knife down and Isaac died, but then he was reborn. There were those 3 days of hell, but then they ended. And there are moments like that. Seeing Israel, our homeland, going into directions that seemed barely able to happen or connected to the Israel that we believe in and grew up with, holding in our hearts, of kibbutzim and Israeli dance and beautiful songs and high ideals, and balancing that history with all of its beauty and grace, and a tired society, a tired ruckus society that doesn't care, or parts of it don't care anymore. And seeing people in this nation whom we fervently disagree with and believe are trying to lead us to the abyss, and learning to live with the fact that they are still going to be our neighbors. They're not going to be going away. And somehow they feel exactly the same way about us as we feel about them. And we have to understand them. And walking with all the conflicting truths about our world, trying to balance all of it, the needs of humanity, the needs of our planet, balancing caution and boldness, helping others, and also trying to be there for our own selves, seeing danger, being real about it, but also living with hope, seeing a world that is increasingly dark and not seeing a solution, but believing that there must be a way. And even more than a way, that through all of it will be the altar of our transformation. And living in such an age is challenging, and yet we have to find a trust that the promises will be fulfilled and logic will return, and our dreams will be fulfilled with a greater stuff than our human imaginations are even capable of. And perhaps this is the greatest expression of the strangeness of being a human being, of having two sides, a soul and a body, and being able to be consciously aware of all of the conflicts in our world, holding different truths at once. And that the vision of the tikkun, of the repair, will be even greater and more beautiful than what we're able to see when all is broken. And that the transformation, when it does come, will bring us to tears, Bezrat Hashem, God willing. And the horn of the sheep that was offered in Isaac's place on the altar is the horn, as the Midrash teaches, that will announce the coming of Mashiach, not only at the end of times, but every time we're able to bring two conflicting truths together, even for a brief moment, and feel a little piece of unity. Hashem kilo tamnu chasadecha, God whose kindnesses never cease. until we walk in the human condition, continuing to walk however we can with the reality we have, carrying unexpected hope and lingering fear, confusion but also joy, with the shofar of hope in our hands, looking up to the mountain, feeling perhaps we've already climbed the greatest part and we're almost there. We cannot always control the climb, but we can control how much hope we keep in our hearts.